Many thanks, Christine. And I'd now like to welcome back our other speakers. Unfortunately, Dame Sally Davis is unable to join us today as she has other commitments, but I'm delighted that Professor Scott Wees is able to join us live from Ontario, Canada. So are you in the room? There we are. Thanks very much. Great. So quickly moving on to some of the questions which have been coming in. And I think probably the first one, I'd like to pose this across to Carol. So we've had a lot of questions coming in during the day about possible environmental risks from the use of our medicines. Are you able to give us any insight into the work being done by global companies to ensure that we can continue to use medicine safely? Over to you, Carol.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the easy question, Dawn. No, we look at the environmental side of things very, very carefully, and we, in our thinking, we divide it up into three general buckets. First bucket is really, and in each bucket we look at what's happening and what we can do and what we're doing and what we can do better. First bucket is development and authorization of products, and there we very much look at when we develop products, which ones have which environmental impacts, and obviously the ones that will move forward through the development phase are those which, and authorization phase, are those which have the least environmental impact. Let me remind people that contrary to human medicines, it's a requirement in the animal health antibiotic space when you ask for authorization to show that aspect, to provide data about the environmental impact. That's not 100% requirement, at least not in the European zone, although it does happen. The second bucket is manufacturing. Of course, manufacturing happens in two ways. One way is by our companies themselves, and the other way is that the AI is manufactured by third parties. Now, there, of course, the companies themselves have full control over their own manufacturing practices, and I've done everything that is required legally to ensure that there are no issues there. And the second side of that is when you're outsourcing manufacturing, that you insist that those people manufacture in a certain way. I think it was a little bit. Dame Sally used the word oozing out of factories. I think that's not certainly not the case. That's incorrect, I would say. But the industry has united in something called the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, which is a global initiative to enforce standards together with the human health industry on third-party producers. Last bucket is the use and disposal. Of course, we do a lot on responsible use. We do a lot of trainings, over 600,000 trainings in the last 3 or 4 years to vets and to users. But there's all kinds of things, the monitoring of activities, of issues, and the disposal that unused quantities are taken back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of stuff there. That's all on the production manufacturing side. Much more complicated when you get into the use side, which is that you get into the whole manure issue and all that stuff. Each country, at least most developed countries, have guidelines and rules about that, which I'm sure Christine can probably knows a lot more about than I do. But I'll stop there because I'm sure somebody else wants to add. A lot.
Thanks.
Let me put it that way.
Thanks very much, Carol. That's very useful insight, and I'm sure people will have your contact details if they want to come back for any more information on that.
Can I just say one more thing? If they want to know more about that, we have a wonderful document on our website called Animal Medicines and the Environment, Principles and Practices, which explains in 20 pages what I just explained in 2 minutes.
Thanks, Carol. And a very different question that's come in here. We've been posed, is the One Health approach enough? What about other elements such as soft skills and social science to change human behaviour? Possibly this is one for Scott and Christine, whether you could share your views on this.
Okay, I'll jump in first. I completely agree. So I talked about the need to have an integrated One Health approach. People talk about collaboration, and that's not enough for me. I think it's got to be integrated. And for me, you don't do animal health without soft skills. I don't think you do human health without soft skills either. If you go to see your GP and things. So the communication and social behaviour of it is absolutely vital. And that's why our slightly novel approach of reducing antibiotic use without regulating that reduced use is so interesting, and how that's been achieved. and how we can learn from that, what the drivers and factors, which the Ruma group know as well as anybody that has been able to achieve that. So yes, for me, well, maybe we should talk about it more, but it's absolutely explicit for me in doing One Health and animal health that it's there. But probably we need to maximise it more in the environmental health space. I think in AMR and particularly, in the UK, we've not been as good at bringing the environment into that space. It's still been a bit at arm's length, despite the fact that humans and animals all interact with it. And understanding people's drivers around the environment, which will be slightly different than your health drivers. And COP26 and the huge reaction and interest it has had is a really good platform to, I think, send us, help us achieve more in that space. But I'll stop there.
I echo a lot of that. I think, like you said, Christine, you can't regulate your way out of this problem. Regulations can help, but ultimately it's human behavior. There's too many ways to get around regulations and too many ways to require to use antimicrobials, regardless of how they're regulated. So I think for me, One Health is an approach. One Health isn't a field. One Health isn't exclusive. One Health has to include social sciences and the arts, psychology, philosophy, sociology, economics. All these things come together because ultimately, a lot of people know what they should do and they just don't because of fear, because of maybe a lack of understanding how to apply it, because of cultural issues. And by culture, I mean, I'm doing this because this is what my neighbor does, and this is what my father did, and this is what grandpa did, and this is what we've done. So I'm going to do that. And a lot of it's just reluctance to change. So the social sciences, behavioral sciences are absolutely critical, and they're probably the area that we need to work on the most. The science is very challenging in AMR, but I don't think it's the most challenging component.
Yeah, and can I just add in that regulation is such a blunt tool in that space, because you make regulation to apply the same to everybody, and yet the drivers and things underneath it may be different. So actually it can result in perverse outcomes. And so that's why, as Scott says, this understanding behaviours and drivers is just so important.
That's great. Thank you very much. Moving on to another slightly different topic. We've discussed a little bit about vaccines this afternoon. And Carol, you mentioned there's been development of a lot of new vaccines, but Carol and Scott, I wonder if you could discuss a little bit more for us about the development of new vaccines and how important that will be in helping prevention rather than cure.
Well, maybe I'll quickly, I think it's, sorry, Carol, do you want to go ahead?
No, you go first.
And maybe less specific to vaccines, it's animal health systems. It's animal health management, and vaccines are a critical component of that. And I think we need to use vaccines, we need to develop new vaccines, but we can't just rely on vaccines, because we've tried to rely on antibiotics, right? We used antibiotics as a crutch for poor management. And the extension of that can be trying to rely on vaccines as a crutch for poor management. The use of vaccine, and I'm not anti-vaccine, we need to do better with vaccination. We need new vaccines, we need to apply them, but we need to do that in the context of improving our health systems. So improving management, improving overall care, improving overall animal health, because vaccines are never going to be 100% protective. They're a tool, and the tool will work much better in healthier populations where it's going to have a better chance to have a big impact. So I think vaccination is really important, but we can't just focus on vaccination. We have to focus on vaccination as part of the overall health management program.
Yeah, I'd echo that completely. Maybe giving an example or to illustrate a certain point, there are vaccines which, and this is a big problem, the economic side of it. There are vaccines which do not actually give, like salmonella vaccines, a direct benefit to the farmer, but have huge societal value. I don't know what it is, Christine, you probably know better than I, but 2.2 million people a year, I think, die globally of salmonella, something like that, and many more get sick. But there is no actual direct financial value for the farmer in giving that vaccine. I don't know what the cost is of it, but that's a great example of where vaccination has a societal value, which does not. But we have to find a way to get those. I think we give those vaccines and to provide that societal value. But the systems are not set up for that. There are many more examples like that. Maybe the other part of the question was all of the innovations in vaccine technology. Well, you've seen some of the COVID vaccines, which have mRNA technology. But there are things like heat-resistant vaccines coming out. There's precision systems for vaccine delivery systems, which allow much more precision in mass vaccination programs. There are customized vaccines and many, many more. I think all of these have societal benefits. They have economic benefits. I come from the Netherlands, and right now we have avian influenza outbreaks. It's the discussion there starting on whether we should start vaccinating again chickens across Europe. And I'm told it's and those are discussions we need to have much more earnestly, I think, in terms of the value of vaccination, because it is the overall, coming back to Scott's point, the overall environmental point. And I mean then from a One Health perspective, human, animal, environment, the impact of that.
Great, thank you. And one final question which has come in is about data. Scott, during your discussion with Dame Sally, this was covered a little bit, where we were talking about global, national and regional data to drive change. Could you explore in a little bit more detail what we need to be doing with our data in order to get more action, how to drive action forward through data?
Well, I think that's a great question, because we need to figure out how to use it, like you said. Surveillance is watching a problem, and watching the car crash tells you what happened. But if you don't use that to figure out how to improve your road safety, you're just watching a car crash. And if we're focusing on surveillance, we're just watching a crash. So we need to figure out how to use that. And to use that properly, we need good surveillance. We need integrated surveillance. We need more than just tells us kilograms of use, right? We need to know how they're being used, why. This brings in the social aspects, because we need to know the impacts of those use, because we can drop kilogram use but make things worse by switching to higher potency drugs. So we have a good foundation with surveillance programs. We have excellent surveillance programs in some areas, but they all could be more integrated to bring in why we're using, how we're using, what the impacts of that are, because that lets us refine. And then if we have that more refined surveillance, we can look at the impact of an intervention. We do a lot of interventions and we have no idea what they do. We say this happened, we reduce this, we increase that, whatever, but we don't necessarily know that had an impact on resistance or that impact on the environment. We have some nice selected examples, but we don't have broad examples from, that apply to all farms internationally. So the short answer, which isn't very short, would be we need better surveillance. We need more comparable surveillance between countries. We need to figure out metrics to use, because that's a big challenge. And the big thing for me is we need more integrated surveillance to really understand more than just the what. It's the why and the how and the where and the when that will help us create the story.
Right, so no pressure there. Oh, Carol, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just one final point on surveillance. I agree with what Scott said, but I think the animal health side is I have to be honest, ahead of the human health side here. The OIE collects data from 160 something countries. Not all data, you can deliver it in levels, but at least 70 or 80 of those countries provide the full package of what they could provide in terms of data, in terms of their use. If you compare that to the human health side with the GLASS system at the WHO, only about 10 countries, I think 11 by last count, provide the full data that they could. So there's much better surveillance actually in the animal health side, maybe because it's a smaller sector and easier than right now on the human health side. So I think there are huge steps which have been taken. Also in Europe, the Europe's collection and surveillance systems are quite good. I do think that in the animal health side, we're ahead there compared to the human health side.
Great, thanks very much. Any last comment from you, Christine, on this?
I couldn't agree more with Scott. Surveillance and actionable intelligence from it is so important. And Carol's right, we do it well in the animal world, but we could do it better. There still is nervousness and concern about sharing health information internationally because somebody may decide not to trade in a certain product with you about that, and getting that balance. So there's a behaviour driver there for governments and people. So there's more impact in sharing it than not sharing it, and creating a trusting environment to do that. And then for me, so OIE, great at having the data, but we need to drive actionable intelligence from it so we get the right actions.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think that's been a very, very useful discussion and left us with some more points to think about. So I think we're going to draw this to a close.